Hey, good morning, Drivetime. Welcome back. I'm your host, David Drum. And as always, we are here with the goal of trying to help you grow in a number of areas in your life, grow as a husband, as a father, as a brother, as a son, and ultimately as a follower of Christ. Joining me again this week is Pastor Mel Lawrence, the author of Chronicle of Grief. And Mel, thank you for being back with us again. I appreciate your time.
Glad to help.
So last week we talked about, you shared first, the reality behind this book was really a kind of your first year of walking through life after the unexpected loss of your daughter, Eva. And you shared that with us and really some tangible steps of how to start moving forward. Now, most of the time are not in a season of traumatic loss, but there's a lot of us who are around people who have experienced loss. And, I think it's just one of those topics where we don't know how to go about helping. We want to be useful to that person. We see they've lost a loved one, or we see they've had a loss in their life, and we want to be present. We care about them, but we don't necessarily know what to do. So my first question for today is, what should we not do?
Yeah. There's a number of really important things. And some of it is we're going against the culture, what the culture teaches us. And that is to kind of leave somebody alone who's experienced a great loss, like a death in a family or a terrible medical diagnosis or whatever. We think, oh, if I say anything about it, I'm just going to be inflicting pain on this person. And so either we avoid them altogether or we avoid saying anything. And that's just a huge mistake. If you have a family member or friend who's been plunged into grief, they'll let you know if they don't want to talk. But I encourage people all the time, do an old-fashioned thing like pick up the phone and call. Send cards, emails, texts. You are not inflicting pain on somebody who's experienced a tremendous loss by talking about it, because here's the reality. They haven't forgotten. You're not reminding them of something that, they forgot that they lost their wife last year or 2 weeks ago. So don't avoid them. Another mistake is that we try to think, well, what can I say to cheer this person up? A, you're not going to cheer them up if they're feeling a great deal of loss and pain. B, it's not really your responsibility to do that. What they really want to know is that they're not alone. Maybe they can explain that. Maybe they can't, but truthfully, almost everybody does not want to be alone when they're going through grief. And so don't try to figure out something to cheer them up. Your job is not to try to distract them. Maybe you talk to them about their loss. Maybe you don't, but I also encourage people, just be natural with it. There aren't any firm rules about this, but you're not going to hurt anybody. You're not going to make any mistakes as long as you don't avoid them, and as long as you don't think that your job is to try to make them happy.
So now you had mentioned something before we had started recording today about people will I guess, be hesitant to bring up the person they've lost or to bring up the loss. And you had mentioned that it was a gift to you when people would say, "Hey, could you tell me about your daughter?" So can you I guess, expound on that a little bit?
Yeah.
As something, I mean, if that's a gift to you as someone who would be coming alongside a grieving person, if that's a gift, I want to be able to give that gift, but I want to understand that.
I think it came as a surprise to me just what a high impact that was, and also how rare it is. I mean, the people around a grieving person are feeling bad for the grieving person. They're saying, man, this is tough. This is terrible. I wish I could take the pain away, whatever. You're focusing on the grieving person. But for the grieving person, in the case of bereavement, the most important thing is that they've lost a dear loved one. And it's the simplest thing in the world at the right time to say, tell me about your mom, or tell me about your dad if your dad lost. Tell me about your brother who died of cancer, or whatever. And some people won't. Maybe they'll choke up and they're not going to be able to say anything. That's fine. That's perfectly fine. But for a lot of people, it is a gift to them, because you're letting them know, I understand that the reason why you're grieving is because of somebody that you knew and loved and was valuable to you. I'll give you an example, David. I mean, my book is about our experience of losing a 30-year-old daughter, but I had an older gentleman come to me and say, oh, I read the book. It was so helpful at so many points. And because I lost my mother recently. And I said, well, tell me about your mother. She's 100 years old. And I thought, okay, this is a guy who he's really grieving the loss of his mother, 100-year-old mother. She was Jewish and a Holocaust survivor. And so that added all the more drama to the story. But I said to him, tell me about your mother. And, he took 10 minutes to tell me all about it. And I know that he appreciated that. It was a comfort to him, and probably also something that he doesn't hear very often. So at the right time, say to your friend or your relative, tell me about those growing up years. Tell me about what your brother liked to do. And if they don't want to, if they're uncomfortable talking about it, they won't. That's fine.
So now you made that statement at the right time. Do you have a thought on what that looks like? I mean, how do we know this is a good time to go down that road?
Yeah. I don't mean time on the calendar, because you can ask that question 2 days after they've lost their loved one, or 2 years later. What I mean by the right time is when there's a chance for the person to take a few minutes if they choose to. In other words, a private time, a time, you don't ask a question like that when you're shopping for groceries with somebody. So the right time there. But as long as you mentioned time, David, also it was a gift to us when somebody realized that the 1 year anniversary of our daughter's death was a weighty thing for us. And there were several people, not many, but there were several people who remembered the date, and they sent an email or they sent a card, and they just said, I know that today must be difficult. There were a couple of people that knew Eva's birthday, or Christmas. The people that show just a little bit of sensitivity on that first Christmas and say, I know this Christmas must be tough, but just wanted to let you know I'm thinking about you, because holidays are tough. That brings to my mind another thing that I just mentioned, David. Sometimes all that you need to do is to say to somebody, I'm thinking about you today. I'm thinking about you today. When I would get a message from somebody, and it wouldn't have to be on an anniversary or any special day, but it could have been 3 months after all this happened or whatever. But, you came to mind today. I said a prayer for you today. Man, that was just as good as gold. That was a gift too, because it was telling me that person, a friend, perhaps, honored me by holding me in their mind just a little bit on that day. And the worst thing for grieving people is to be forgotten. It's inevitable. Right. It's inevitable that 3 months down the line, everybody else, even close relatives, have moved along in life, but you haven't. 3 months is still like it just happened yesterday. So that's a little thing you can do for your friend or family member is 2 years later, say, I'm thinking about you today. I was remembering your daughter, something that came up, and it'll be an affirmation that they're not forgotten.
That's really, really interesting, because it really wasn't that any of them brought some new revelatory thought or that they passed some huge chunk of knowledge or wisdom. It was just the fact that your daughter, your wife, your loss, your son, that you were in their mind, that you held that worth, that value to them, and that you weren't forgotten about. So, I mean, that's not even a matter of, kind of that struggle of, well, I don't know what to say. I don't want to say the wrong thing. So they're really not saying anything other than, hey man, I thought about you today.
It's huge. It's huge. It's huge. And, these are the types of things where we think, well, that's, what difference does that make? That's meaningless. Those are the things that are really helpful, because, none of us are looking for somebody to tell us what to do or to try to cheer us up. But it's the little things like, tell me about your loved one. I'm thinking about you today. I'm sure Christmas is difficult this year, that type of thing. Let me mention this though too, David. You made me think of something else. Once in a great while, there was somebody who said, and this could be years later, they said, I worked with your daughter at Barnes and Noble, and I've never met you before, but I just want to let you know that it was a real joy working with her. She was a delight. Or somebody else that had some other anecdote, and they said, you probably don't know this, but your daughter and I experienced this together, or she was helpful to me. Those are huge gifts too. So if you can think, if sometime after your friend has lost a loved one, it can be months later, it can be years later, give those little gifts to your friends. And it's honoring.
That's interesting because, in that sense, I mean, you knew your daughter way, way better than the person from Barnes and Noble, but they saw a different side of her and they had a different experience with her. And to hear that even gives you a more full view of who your daughter was.
Yep.
So that's interesting. So if you have that ability to speak about the person, if you had an independent relationship with them, that's another opportunity where you get to tell a story and share really in the loss. Do you think that helps in the sense of, I hate to use the word commiserate with them, but that maybe let them know they're not in that loss alone?
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I had conversations with some of Eva's friends months or years later. And when they told me that how much they missed her, that made me sad, but that's okay. But more importantly, it let me know that my daughter's life had value. That's what we're really doing. That's what we're doing, by the way, at a funeral, is if you have a good, well-constructed funeral service, you're showing respect and honor to the one who has passed away. And that's a good thing. It's painful, but it's good to let people know anything. And it doesn't even need to be a story. It can be by the way, I knew your daughter well, and I just remembered how fun it was to be around her, or something like that.
Right. Well, Mel, I can't thank you enough for sharing this, because again, it's neat to hear after reading the book and I guess having a visual of your process and being able to picture in my mind these statements that you make in the book, but then to hear it from you firsthand is actually really rewarding to me, and to see you light up a little bit as you bring up these encouraging points about people asking about your daughter and talking about your daughter, after a period of time. It's really interesting to see that. And what I see is the veracity of exactly what you're asking us to do as we come along those who are in loss, because I can see your demeanor shift from last week's video to this week's video, where you're talking about the gifts that you were given in these moments. So from that standpoint, again, like we did last week, we like to step in with a tangible. And actually I feel like this whole video has been tangible steps. Don't do these things, but do these things. And so for this week, because let's face it, we're not always around someone experiencing loss and grief. But do you have a thought for the guys going into this week, a step they can take?
Yeah. Maybe it's a perspective, David. I think that all of us are looking for purpose in life. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that's a tough search. I know this from experience, and that is that one of the greatest purposes, certainly of people who are followers of Christ, is to be the safety net, is to be the supporters of people going through tough stuff in life, because life is full of difficulties: divorce, disease, auto accidents, death. And all of us are going to be around people all the time. I mean, I'm going to go from this recording to the hospital to visit somebody who's in a really, really bad spot right now. And I would just like to encourage your listeners, consider this a great purpose for your life, is to just be a person who can pass along in small and simple ways acts of love and concern and grace. You're not fixing somebody. You're not making them happy. You are just their support. And I would say the same thing, too, for the church. As a pastor, I think the purpose of the church is to proclaim the gospel of free forgiveness in Christ. And that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. Secondarily, it's to be the family of God, to be there for when your brother or sister stumbles. And that's a purpose for all of our lives.
That's good. Well, Mel, thank you very much for spending a couple of weeks with us, for sharing with us. Again, guys, the book, A Chronicle of Grief, I can't call it an easy read because it is such a weighty topic, but it is not a long read. It is not something that is beyond our ability to comprehend it. And it's broken down into chunks that even as simple guys, we can wrap our heads around it. And it gives us a lot of insight into those around us who are struggling with traumatic loss. So Mel, thank you for being here. Thank you for spending time with us. And thank you for writing this book.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to chat with your audience, David.
Gentlemen, we will see you again next week here on Drivetime.